Hello, we are Ben,
Olivia,
and Ingrid.
We will talk about Alexander II and Alexander III.
Alexander II reforms. He had a lot of reforms that he did because he thought that it would improve his country. We will talk about some of them, many of them.
economic. Alexander II created a unified treasury and introduced efficient, centralized administrative system. In 1962, budgets were published. And in 1881, the 700 miles of track became 14,000 miles of track, and it was designed to encourage grain export and supported the troops. In 1864, exports stood at approximately 26 million tons, which increased to 86 million tons by 1880. By 1878, there were 278 municipal banks, 727 loan and savings associations, 566 joint stock companies, and 33 joint stock commercial banks.
Local government. Alexander set up local government to devolve some power from the center while maintaining a firm control and stability. He set up the Zemstva in 1864, which was made up of 45% nobility, 15% merchants and townsmen, and 40% farmers. The Zemstvas were in charge of public education, public health, local economic development, road building, and the provision of services like water and fire prevention. The Dumas were the Zemstvas of the city.
Education. Alexander wanted education for all, including the serfs, and increased the number of primary schools by 4 times. He also made it possible for women to go to school, and by 1881 there were 2,000 women in universities. There was also a standard curriculum that only focused on Greek, Latin, and mathematics. He also freed the universities from censorship.
Legal. There was a huge change from the nobility being in control. There was an introduction of a bar examination to allow the practice of law, and salaries were increased to reduce the pressure of taking bribes. There were 2 types, the regular court, appointed by Tsar, and the justice of peace, chosen by Zemstva or Dumas. There was also a jury that worked independently from the pressures of the nobility.
Military reform. Alexander appointed Milutin as the Minister of War, and in 1859 he reduced the service of an average soldier from 25 years to 16 years. Each village sent a certain number of males to join the army every year. By 1870, 12% of people in the Junker schools which trained officers were serfs and not nobles, which threatened the nobility.
Censorship reforms. 1865 press laws freed newspapers, books, government publications from places of learning, and classical literature from censorship. New university regulations changed. Freedom of expression was allowed, as well as importation of uncensored school books.
Emancipation. The goal of emancipation was to free the serfs. After the bitter loss in Crimea in 1855, Alexander knew something had to change. 80% of the people live on the countryside. Of this 80%, 30% lived on state farms, which were Tsar owned, and there was more freedom to move and they were paid monetary salaries. The other 50% were serfs that lived on nobility farms, and they lived in meres, and a landlord would own several meres. The serfs were starving, there was no education, no social mobility, and no growth in agricultural production. Something had to change. In 1857, proposed reforms were sent out. In 59, changes discussed with the districts, and in 61, the serfs were freed.
Alexander II died in 1881, and his son, Alexander III, succeeded him. From 1882 to 1885, legislation was introduced to improve working conditions for women and children through factory inspections. In 1886, laws were introduced to specify the procedures for hiring and firing workers, and also for paying wages. Russification. People had their names Russianified and were forced to learn to speak and read Russian. In 1885, all teaching in Poland, except those pertaining to the Polish language and Catholicism, had to be in Russian. A permanent garrison of 100,000 Russian soldiers were stationed in Poland. Anti-Semitic persecution emerged with over 600 social, political, and economic restrictions, which led to pogroms. Peasants were forced to sell crops to the government at the lowest rates possible and were made to pay backdated taxes and redemption payments. The increased exportation, combined with the worst harvest in the century, led to 20 million going hungry and 1 to 2 million dying.